And, jinx is a key word here because back in August, when the NFL was kind of subtly thumping its chest from time to time about the success it was having in keeping the coronavirus out of 32-team facilities, I had a head coach text me and say, would somebody please tell them to shut up? Because, number one, you're jinxing us. And number two, you're going to make people complacent if they think it's no big deal. And after 3 weeks of the regular season, we kind of thought it was no big deal. And for the past 2 weeks, it's been the biggest deal that the NFL has had to contend with. And I answer these emails every day, Charean. Why are you talking about the coronavirus? Why are you talking? Well, because there are significant issues as it relates to whether teams can practice and play, when games are going to be played, and it's driving the discussion. I'd rather not talk about it. I'm sure you'd rather not talk about it, but the circumstances are forcing us to.
And guess what? It's going to be the lead storyline for the rest of the year. I mean, we've had multiple game changes now. We're going to have more. We see that. This is not going away, Mike. And COVID is here and COVID rules. And it's about risk mitigation. Once it's in the locker room, as you've pointed out, how do you keep it from spreading? And it's going to get into locker rooms. And we've seen that yet again today with yet another team in the Jets.
Yeah, and that's what happened today. Not long after we wrapped the program earlier, I caught wind that the Jets had a player who tested positive, poked around, wanted to be responsible for a change. I was so tempted to go with it because I trusted my source. But I wanted to confirm it, and I wanted to get more information, and I learned that it's a presumptive positive, could home out of an abundance of caution, got a retest of the player who tested positive, and because the Jets are in New Jersey and they're not that far from the lab that does the testing, they're expecting to hear something sooner rather than later. I just found out they haven't heard anything yet, and here we are at 5:03 p.m. Eastern. But that's one of the realities of this, Charean. How quickly you find out the results of your off-site PCR testing is driven by literally how far they have to drive to take the samples to the lab. Some teams get their PCR off-site test results early evening. Some get them late evening. Some get them middle of the night. Some get them the next morning. And for something that is that important, especially when we're monitoring the potential for an outbreak, you'd like to think there's a better way, but there isn't. It all hinges on how long it takes to get the samples from point A to point B.
Yeah, Mike Vrabel said the other day they get their test at 4:30 a.m. So he gets up, looks at the test, so they're positives, no positive. And of course, the way they've gone, there have been positives almost every day. We haven't had any, and maybe they'll get to open their facility, and maybe they'll get to play this week. They're on the right track, but we've seen this before when they had one day with no positives, and then boom, the next day they had positives. So they've got to have 2 straight days without positives, and everyone there is crossing their fingers. But again, we won't know until 4:30 a.m. whether anybody tested positive today. So they need to do these quicker. And I know back when this first started, Mike, you wrote a story in March, April, somewhere around there, that they expected that by August, and again, thumping their chest, expected by August that we would have turnaround tests, 15 minutes, boom, before you go into the facility. We're going to test you. We're going to know if you have COVID before you walk into the building. That obviously hasn't happened. We have a donut hole in the testing as well. When they weren't testing on the day of the game, day before the game, they weren't testing. And we've had that donut hole shine itself brightly this week. And so it hasn't gone exactly as the NFL planned starting back in March. And it's going to be the main storyline, whether people like it or not. We don't like it. But it's going to dictate this season for the NFL and how it goes. And we're going to have more games postponed, guaranteed.
The biggest donut hole is the incubation period, and that's something that I'm not sure anybody's really focused on until we got into the season and recognized if someone has an exposure one day, they may not generate a positive test for 4 or 5 days. Relates to the pandemic, but one of them is the impression they were creating by the extremely flexible roster rules, and most specifically, Charean, the rule that allows up to 16 members of the practice squad to be elevated to the active roster as late as 90 minutes before kickoff, which creates the impression that you could find out on Saturday a bunch of guys are positive, and hey, we got 16 practice squad players. We're going to bump up as many as we need to, and we're going to be good to go. Or if they find out on Sunday, if there's a test that gets redone, if there's an on-site point-of-care test, they actually don't do the point-of-care test because they're concerned about false positives. But he created the idea that you just take one guy out and put another guy in. What we're learning is it's not as simple as taking one guy out, because once you take the one guy out, you got to figure out who else may end up getting this, whether it's people who are in close contact, whether it's people who were in close contact but it didn't show up through the tracking device. That was one of the concerns last Saturday night with the Saints. 4 guys sitting around Michael Burton, the fullback, who had a false positive. They weren't flagged by the league's device as to people who needed to be monitored and tested, even though they were close enough that they would have gotten it. So this is a disconnect. And that's why, a lot of people are saying, well, no big deal. Guy's positive, just kind of kick him to the curb until he's ready to come back and keep going. That's not happening. That's why they sent everybody home today from the Jets facility. That's why the Patriots have been home for a few days. That's why the Titans aren't back. Once it's in, you don't know when the next domino has fallen until days after the fact, and that chain can continue. And I think it took the Titans example to get the league to take a step back and say, holy crap, this is a hell of a lot more complicated than we thought.
Yeah, it's not as simple as next man up, for sure. And that's what the NFL motto has been for years. Hey, next man up. Hey, we have an injury. Our quarterback's out. Next man up. Next man up. Well, this isn't next man up, and it's not as simple as that. The Patriots you mentioned them. They haven't practiced all week. Now, they are planning on reopening their facility tomorrow, having practice at 10:30 a.m. It will be their only practice of the week before they go play. So here you go. And that's kind of how it's going to be. This is going to be almost like winging it in the NFL for much of this season for a lot of teams. Maybe not all teams go through this, but we've seen multiple teams now have to sort of wing it. And coaches are not, as we know, good at winging it. So they're going to have to learn how to do that and learn how to do it in an effective and efficient way, because a lot of this is going to be virtual meetings. You're not going to get to practice off-site, as we've seen the Titans do, and are going to pay a stiff punishment, we think, for that. And so they're going to have to make do with what they have and sort of be impromptu and be flexible on everything this entire year.
One thing, and I'm going to go off script here, even though we've got several other topics to get to in this opening segment. Paul Allen, by the way, Vikings play-by-play voice, is going to join us in about 10, 15 minutes. The Harbaugh rule is now in effect. And if a coach or anyone approaches an official with the mask down, and I assume they mean coach, because the players don't have a mask that they can put on when they're on the field. So this is directed mainly at coaches who would be giving an official an earful. If you pull your mask down, if your face isn't covered, you're subject to a 15-yard penalty or a suspension or fine or loss of draft picks. And that's a reaction to the complaint that was made because John Harbaugh was in the face of an official last Monday night against the Chiefs. And this is another one of the disconnects, because when I asked the league this week, hey, is there still a rule that says you guys can't congregate closer than 6 feet together after games? They said, yeah, that's still the rule. And then they sent me the CDC information that says you got to be within 6 feet of someone for 15 minutes to transmit the virus. So, okay, well, why are you sending me this? Why are you citing this if your rule is you can't do it? And why is your rule that you can't do it if the CDC guidance says you have to be pressed together for 15 minutes? So there's all these mixed messages everywhere we look. And this is another one. The NFL in one breath would say, no pun intended, that you have to be in the same vicinity as someone else for 15 minutes to transmit the virus. And then in the next breath, they say thou shalt not approach an official with your mask uncovered or your face uncovered. So it would just be nice, whether it's the NFL or society at large, for us all to have one set of rules that we go by as to how this thing works, because it's all over the place. And is that too much to ask, Charean, that we just have one set of rules for this thing?
I want one set of rules. That would be fantastic. And then everyone would know how to react. People are still sticking out their hands to shake their hands. I saw it. If you watched Hard Knocks, and I know you didn't watch much of it, I don't think this year, but I watched all of Hard Knocks, and the first thing, I think it was the first episode, maybe the second, when Sean McVay is going to cut a player, he immediately reaches out his hand and shakes hand. And I tweeted, somebody tell Sean McVay to stop shaking hands. And I know it's natural, and I know it's what we're accustomed to doing, but all those things have gone away, and they're probably going to go away forever. So I don't know if it's a fist bump or elbow bump, or figure something else out, and let's have a rule that what we're going to do to greet each other and all those other things.
Nod.
It'd be nice to know. Polite nod would be great.
Polite nod, a salute, whatever the case may be.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.